and fascist same time. Because it mistreats people and has dual standards.
But that happens everywhere in the world.
But doesn't make it right, does it?
No, it certainly doesn't. But at the same time, as we say, see, we are coming out. I mean, our minds are developing. I mean, today we are thinking about the same world where we were fighting each other, and today we are calling it the global village. So the mindset is changing, and the mindset has, I'll say specifically, changed probably more after 9/11. And prior to that, nobody was even willing to think of a change because everybody was so set in their own views whatsoever. Then all of a sudden we see this new change in the global order. And I think
that's a fair enough argument, but I think the global village makes demands on us for being the global village. There are certain expectations if we are going to look at the whole globe as a single unit. Then there are certain expectations in terms of knowledge production, news reporting, and competing systems of ideas. If we can't go beyond nations, then there has to be an equitable distribution of news among the nations.
Yes, but you still keep your own identity. I mean, you have again a prime example, even when you speak of the global village of the European Union. I mean, European Union, they're all the same, but at the same time, the media in the Union works independently of each other.
No, I'm not asking for a single, I'm not asking for all media to become one and there should be one single news item. No, I'm not saying. I'm saying two things. Can we go beyond national perspectives on news? If we can't, then can we make sure that flow of information every direction is open?
No, I don't think we can go beyond because every country
That's granted. So now the next question is, can we have equally free flow in all directions?
I'll tell you, I think the internet is going to provide that free flow. If you go to googlenews.com, you have access to 4,500 newspapers around the world.
Correct.
And that's
and
blowing the doors.
No choice is yours.
Exactly.
And besides, technology develops in leaps and bounds. We don't know what will be invented tomorrow besides internet. Because there might be ways found to block internet access. And these examples we do observe in China, or Russia is planning a new law now. But I wanted to comment on your definition of America as a democracy and as a fascist state. I disagree with that.
Please do.
Democracy is not a final destination. Democracy is a process. And certain individuals do make mistakes. But the democracy is when we have checks and balances, when we can tell the judge, you are wrong, and there will be certain mechanisms, certain tools to show him that he is wrong and to make it right. And I think that's what America is about. And again, people do make mistakes.
And there are cycles in American history. And one of the very best checks and balances, to borrow Ina's term, is called an election.
Exactly.
And it may be very, very possible. It may be very, very possible that because of 9/11 even, and the realization on the part of the large body of Americans that what happens out there, what happens over there is important, that it may be that you will have, in the next election cycle, a president that's far more attuned to the needs to have a conversation with the world and not just speak unilaterally to the world. And I think that may well happen. And I think that will have reverberations in the judicial system in the United States and certainly in the way Americans receive information.
Mr. Heil, I feel the need to ask you a question on behalf of people who may think differently the following question. I think there's little too self-serving understanding of the history. There was not a single election in this country that could change slavery. There had to be war. It was U.S. Supreme Court in Dred Scott case which had said blacks are not only not citizens, they are not people, they are private property. There was no legislature that overturned that. There had to be a civil war. In 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson said separate was equal and therefore constitutional. It was the street power that corrected the state power. So what I'm asking is it going to be simply the goodwill of the people who rule? When they change their mind, there will be a different way of dealing with people? Or there has to be a critical analysis of these practices by the civil society and the live street in this country? As we talk about Arab street, I'm talking about American street. Has to be responsible for the American street to look at not only these causes, but free flow of information. Because my concern is, when I look at the flow of information, that Americans, good people, are getting such one-sided information, they are bound to come to one-sided conclusions. For instance, in terms of Iraq, let's look at the multiplicity of sources, how many sources are cited here. And I think Chomsky has repeatedly documented, New York Times, the best publication. in terms of the one-sidedness of their news. So what we are accepting, I'm accepting American principle as best principles, but I'm saying, are we honestly applying those best principles to ourselves in terms of open, multiple, competing, pluralistic flow of information, where we see people competing in terms of understanding and interpreting our history? That's the question.
There is a balance to it. Blogs. You can learn truth if you perceive it differently from many blogs. Such as free access to information, you can't hide anything. Don't you agree with that?
I do, and that I think is a ray of hope, as was said earlier. But I think that does not exonerate the television, the radio, and the newspaper from their responsibility. Blog is, instead of them, not in place of them. It's like a separate avenue that opens up in a small way, and very few people join a single blog. You can't have millions of people joining blogs. Millions will continue to get their news through the interpreted news that's made available through major channels.
And also, may I add that new news, which is a new avenue, and that is coming out through SMSs. I mean, if somebody wants to break a news, I mean, it's all coming through mobile technology. I mean, no matter where you are. And that's a new avenue which I fear is going to be used a lot more.
I will not fear it. I will welcome it and say, I hope it's going to be used out more, but these are tangential possible means that may rectify, all right? What I'm asking is, in the world, the United States for the foreseeable future is going to be the leader, and people are going to make decisions that are going to affect hundreds of millions of people. Are we saying the flow of information is judicious and fair, back and forth?
See, it's a very difficult question. I mean, when you go back to the times of the slavery, there is more slavery now than there has ever been in the history of mankind. There are 27 million children are in bonded labor. They're in slavery all over the world, and yet nothing is done about it. So the news faction, wherever you drive it, wherever you take it, I think we have to see it who's doing what, and what are your priorities at this present or at any given moment in time. I mean, the priorities seem to take precedence over a lot of issues, and particularly about this slavery issue. I mean, this is a major issue which no one is really talking about at this present moment in time.
That is the role, if I might say, and that is where international broadcasters like the BBC and the Voice of America can make an enormous difference, because they will throw what I call the Klieg lights on a problem of slavery, a VOA series on child labor in India was an award-winning program series several years ago. If we continue to base a lot of our programming on the need to be, as I say in chapter 18 of the book, Voice of America, a voice for the voiceless. And that is a very, very important quality. And if we are that, and truly that, then we can begin to at least illuminate a different perspective, not only in our own country, but abroad. And in our own country, you can see things opening up in the United States, because now people can go to voanews.com and they can avail themselves of much of this very, very rich information that nobody seems to be much aware of in the media. But eventually all of this is going to come together, and you will have, because of the paradox of plenty, to go back to the original phrase, you will have the traditional media, I think, having to react. They're going to have to start to cover things that they are now not covering in order not to disappear. Be extinct or be distinct or be extinct is the word, and they will recognize that.
I hope.
Well, don't you think readers can write to their newspapers and magazines and radio shows and say, we want this covered, and really have the voice of readers come out? You think we can change things individually?
Well, let's look at your publication, which is so dear to me at least. How many mainstream channels or newspapers cover that news? For instance, I went to Voice of America and looked at Judge Gleason's news was reported there. I went there and saw if the verdict about Professor Samuel was reported there. Not one of the major issues have been reported. When there are Muslims killed in this country, shot dead by bigots, it's not covered. For instance, General Birkin, when he said, I know my God is the true one and they're not, was it covered by Voice of America? So we are my discussion is about globalization.